have to switch to English now because we have some guest in the studio. Well, it's not a studio, but welcome nonetheless. Marcella and Job. Nice of you to be here, seriously. Yeah, I
nice
can't
for you to be here. Yeah.
Yes. Can you hear us?
Hello, Jakob and Daniel.
Hello. And Job, are you with us? You have a cool headset on. It looks like you work at McDonald's, but let's hear your voice. It's not working, Job.
Yeah, it's working now.
Perfect.
Hey!
To hear from you.
What is your order? How can I help you?
Can I get 2 Big Macs delivered in Copenhagen?
I'm so hungry now.
No, seriously, we have to get back to the topic because we don't have so much time. Marcella, you are in Madrid right now. Tell me how you I know you're in some kind of quarantine. Can you please just explain how you ended there in the first place?
Yeah, of course. Well, we are studying right now a program called 4 Cities. It's a Master in Urban Studies. And as part of our studies, our last semester is here in Madrid. So we were like in the middle of the semester, and then this happened, and some of my classmates and friends went back home to their home countries. And I just decided to stay here because I'm from Mexico and would have been a bit hard to go back home. So I'm here stuck in Madrid, but happily stuck in Madrid.
I think we'll get back to your the conditions of being stuck in an apartment. Job, you were also part of this program, right? But you made it out on maybe the last flight going out of Madrid. I don't know. Tell me about it.
Almost the last flight, but it was definitely different conditions as we find ourselves now in. But I must say, I could have been in Madrid as well, but now the current society is like it that it doesn't matter if you live next door or live in another country or even live in a different continent. You still can't travel,
No.
So, I'm in Maastricht at the moment.
Yeah.
Holland. Yeah.
I have a quick question, because I've heard a lot of news about people where it's like, then we had to go to the airplanes, and then that's like it. How does it actually work when you're have to go on this Corona adventure to get back to a country with the airplane? It's like everything is totally security, or how does it go?
I was luckily on one of the flights where they were not completely aware yet about Corona and where they didn't have the measures in place. But I would say avoid airports at the moment. But yeah.
Good tip. but we have to get back to spread the stories, not the virus. This is a kind of project, I can maybe call it, that you guys, together with some other of your co-students, right, came up with and saw the necessity in, but you saw it pretty quickly in comparison, because I know there's been other initiatives like that coming up afterwards. But can you please explain us how you got the idea and how it evolved in the beginning?
Yeah, sure, Jakob. I would say, as Marcella already introduced you, we are all urban studies students, so we are very much fascinated by the urban and by cities. And I would say if there's one thing that's very striking in this crisis is that cities are affected. It's the places which are the hotbeds of the crisis, where you see the spread of the virus, but also the empty streets that are very dystopian and people are not in contact anymore, and the local buzz of a city suddenly disappears in this crisis. So we got fascinated by this sudden shutdown of cities. But instead of thinking, well, the city is dead now, it will disappear, there's nothing to see there anymore, we got fascinated by what's behind the door. The city still continues, but it's a new city that emerges. And we got fascinated by that. But instead of only focusing on our own stories, we started wondering, but how is it to live in a different society that's going through the same experience, but in different conditions? And that has ended up being a platform where we have shared 150 stories so far from literally every corner of the world. And that's amazing.
It's fucking amazing.
Yeah, and that's actually the concept. It's a platform where people can contribute their own perspectives, and it's usually a personal story, often written in their own language. So people have this, we are all there for inclusivity of different narratives. I understand that in the broadcast and the media, you need to show how many people are infected. You need to have this information flow, of course, but there's more to it. And we think that these stories also provide a sense of like collective hope, what we can maybe talk about later, or global solidarity, as we call it.
Yeah, but weren't you surprised, sorry Daniel, how fast it like spread, in the sense that I know for myself that the idea is so fucking clear and it's really good, and I could just see by every day you get so many messages from people writing stories to you. Were you surprised of the success, like how big it became very quickly?
I think the excitement is still there, of course, and when we receive it, and we're so surprised how many people want to contribute and also endorse this initiative. Thanks again for inviting us. I mean, this is also part of spreading the story, I would say. And you support a lot of people. Yeah, exactly. But I also see that this period also is a time for people to creatively express themselves, and that they very much feel a need to connect with each other. And we have this this slogan that we developed over time, where we say, like, if we can't dwell in our cities any longer, then it should be our minds that wander and our stories that should travel. I think it's one of the few things that still allow us to exchange experiences, but also, it helps us to live through this crisis in a very compelling and interesting way, I would say. Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering, it's like, it sounds like the stories is getting told and then they get out there and people can like contact you and tell their story. Do you like experience it goes the other way, that people actually contact you because the story helped them in a kind of a way to like deal with this really weird fluffy element we call corona right now?
Yeah, Marcella, do you maybe have an experience?
Yeah, I've actually received stories. For instance, I will give like a brief example. There was this story about a tic-tac-toe with the windows in Berlin. And the other day, a friend of mine contacted me and told me that she wanted to do the same with her neighbors, except that she lives like in a small.
What is the concept with the tic-tac-toe?
So it's this neighbor that lives in a building, and he's surrounded by other buildings in which the design of the windows is of like a 3x4 square grid. Sorry, and then they start putting like the tic-tac-toe game, and they start playing with the neighbors from one building to the other one. Yeah, I don't know if I explained it well. But just these very creative ideas that end up making people happy, even if it's just for a little moment, to forget about the painful situation in which some people might be in. And I think that's also part of spreading this collectivized hope, as Job mentioned. So we've had stories of different sorts. We've had stories that provide like a reflection on different realities. We have recipes for fun things to try at the kitchen. We have poems. We have like different ways that people have expressed their feelings and thoughts, which has been really nice, especially for us that we get to read all of them. I think it's been a great experience.
Yeah, for you as a team, I can tell that you're dealing with also translating and like putting it out there in a understandable form. And I just mean to kind of mediate between them. But like I didn't know that, for example, you had the poems as well, because you didn't set any boundaries, right, for the stories themselves, and people just came with what they felt like, or something.
I think also the platform grew based on the contributions we received. Yeah. I think the whole idea started with an idea, a very simple idea, where there was kind of the eagerness and also the curiosity to capture all these experiences, but we were not kind of guiding people too much in what those experiences would be. And I think that's also the nice thing about the platform. Of course, it's sometimes hard to operate, and you're also like, how can we help? And we're also thinking of new ways that we are expressing those stories. So we're working on a podcast in which we interview experts based on the contributions that we've received. So there's actually dialogue between the stories we receive and experts that reflect on them. And we also see songs coming. I also think
that's amazing.
Yeah, also to reflect the diversity of our cities, it would be a pity to narrow it down to stories as a written text. I think stories are told for ages and ages and ages, and if it would be signals and smoke, that would also be fine. That's a story too.
From your top of the building, yeah.
Exactly. Why not? Yeah, let's be open for that.
Yeah, sure. I can imagine you've told your friends about what happened, but you also told the whole fucking world in, for example, a BBC kind of podcast, news podcast on your birthday. Can you maybe recount that a bit? Because it also captures the strange meeting you have kind of like during, being locked in a specific building. You mentioned some of your neighbors on your birthday and stuff like that.
Yeah, so that was a fun experience. It was a nice birthday after all. Very memorable, I would say. So we had a small interview with the BBC, quite small, like 2 minutes, and somehow I ended up telling them that it was my birthday and that I was spending like my birthday at home, obviously, and it was very different because I was going to spend the day with my flatmate and with her 2-year-old niece, who has now become like my best friend. So it's nice, it's just like a different way to have a good time. And I don't know what else to say. Somehow they have become like a family, being 2 months with them in a house. We become like a small family for the quarantine. And I also feel that with the team that is behind the spread stories, not the virus, it's also been like a way to be together, to be close, and just be there for each other. But the BBC interview was great and fun and unexpected. So it was a nice birthday gift as well. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. One of the things you mentioned there is, which somehow really moved me, because it really made me realize how many stories from so many countries that you've gotten. You talked about the global South, and that this not being only a platform where stories from, for example, European capitals, which we have a lot of friends in European capitals. I was just really impressed by the thing, as you said, like you have stories from the global South that recounts a total other experience with the coronavirus, one that might not even be about how to spend your quarantine in your apartment, but how to fucking like make a living when you can't go outside, for example. Like this part of the project, which is also like making aware of the social like the differences in, for example, economical standing. Like, do you ever wonder that this is also kind of a not explicit political project, but at least I don't know, can you take the politics out of it?
I think we can, because at the end, our platform, what like the aim of the platform is to literally just provide a platform for citizens to express themselves, so they can do it with some like creative input, but they can also reflect on politics, or they can also reflect on other things. I will talk a bit about the global South situation, because we promote a lot of inspiring this global solidarity, because we also want to make visible stories from the global South and realities that are very different from the European and the American context, which I think is very important to make visible. For instance, what happens when the restriction says that you have to stay at home, but you don't have a home. What happens there? And no one talks about that, I mean, not at least in this kind of platforms. Or what happens, for example, when you depend on an informal job, when the cities suddenly close and you make a living out of what you work on the day, or what happens when a country like, for instance, Mexico depends on the revenues from migrants in the US. So these are all like the kind of stories that we also want to show. We want to provide a platform for that as well. So I think in this sense, Spread Stories, Not the Virus has been successful, because we have managed to show a little part of those stories, but we just hope that it keeps growing, and maybe at the end of our call we will tell you some exciting news about that.
Very nice. I'm very excited that.
Yeah,
I came to wonder because it really sounds like a very, very beautiful project, and I imagine that a lot of people like let you guys into their homes by like sharing their stories and their ideas and how it feels. Do you actually talk with them, meet the persons behind the story, like Skype with them and so on to hear, or is it just everything on paper or video, or how does it work?
I think that's an interesting question, Daniel. I think on the one hand, you also want to provide people's privacy in a way, and you also see some people contribute stories, but they write it under pseudonym, or they come up with ways that they can still express themselves. I think instead of maybe having an insight in their homes, it's rather an insight in what they see if they look out of their windows. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's a different perspective that we capture. It's not the home experience. Some people write about that, but it's rather the view that people have to the outside. I also think that our homes have already become like golden cages, at least in the West, very much like a golden cage. And the walls become mirrors almost. That I can also imagine that the platform is nice in a way because it allows people to kind of escape the home. And what you say about this, about the engagement and the empowerment, I do think that there is an element of this for sure. We have email contact with all the contributors. And like I say, we're trying to engage them more and more. I must say that we were also a bit positively overwhelmed by all the stories in the beginning. So you can imagine it was maybe not the first thing we could get to. But we are getting there. And I also think it is very important. And we're also thinking of ways where we can have a dialogue between contributors. And also making this something lasting longer than this crisis, or something the post-crisis. And let's emphasize once again, I think that this crisis is not only to be solved, if you can solve it in a way, by world leaders in a conference call, or doctors in a platform in a laboratory, or these scenes. I think it's also a opportunity for us to connect with people from other sides of the world, and also find what we share, and also where we differ, and have a conversation about that. Yeah.
I'm really intrigued also by this kind of long-term perspective, because like, as you say, the mainstream media can't wait until this. Of course, we all can't wait to come to its end, but still, like, they are fixated on dates where you have the next resolution and stuff like that. But of course, the stories and your own experiences, they go deeper than that, and they go further to the future. Like, can you put some more words on what that kind of further perspective could include, or talk about?
Yeah, I can briefly say something about that, and I'm sure that Marcella has something to add on that. I think it's also like we're now thinking a lot about how is it different, our society now. So we can't meet in public spaces, and we discuss that. But I think also those stories can provide us input for thinking about how it could be different, but also how it should be different. And I think I agree with Marcella about saying that it's not necessarily political, but those questions become political. But we don't provide the answer, you know? We are capturing all those answers, and then it's up to you as a reader, but maybe also further on as an expert or as someone who is in a position of power to decide what you do with all these inputs. But I would rather say it's a kind of a modest first draft of what the heck is going on that we all don't understand. And I mean, in any way, if we can contribute to recovery, but also to resilience. So next time a crisis happens, I think that's already a huge gain. Yeah.
Sure. Do you want to elaborate, Marce, or do you want to wait a bit?
Just a little thing. Because I think this goes beyond quarantine. You know, and as we know, the pandemic is like a wave. So even though in Europe we start seeing how the measures are being softened, so to say, in Latin America, for instance, it still hasn't reached the peak. So we still have a lot to do, and also reflection doesn't have an end date. You know, so even though the quarantine or the measures end by the end of the month or next month or whenever, I think there's a lot to reflect upon after, and a lot of lessons that we should hopefully learn, and those are the political questions that Job was mentioning, and yeah.
Amazing. I think we need to get to the next song, and this was one that you chose. Oh, sorry, Daniel.
Yeah. I would just say I will try to find the song, but I just, when you were talking about it, I like kind of see it all that you're doing, like one global big diary about what's actually is going on. I think that's pretty beautiful. I will find the song now.
You chose it, Job.
Yeah.
And you said you had a bit of context.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's a song by a Swedish producer, and it's based on a sample which is actually like from the early 20th century, and so it's a gospel, American Southern gospel song.
Damn.
And it has the title "Cheer Up, My Brother." And I think "Cheer Up, My Brother" also refers to kind of what we see around the globe, messages of hope, like "Todo irá bien," "Tout irá bien," everything is going to be all right. Alles komt goed, as we say in Dutch. I don't know what you say in Denmark. Help me out there.
Alt kommer til at blive godt. You guys might know that I have studied for 5 years now comparative literature, and when I see some kind of parallel to that course, of course I need to mention it. Because, and we talked a bit about it before, but because you Job, you said that, like, noting this kind of very human response to situations like that, like, I was just a bit surprised that people just went for it. Like, I could imagine that not a lot of people maybe were writing in their everyday life, but it seemed to come pretty natural for them. Like, I was just very impressed by that. Were you also impressed?
Well, I think it's the Killers that sing, like, are we humans or are we dancer? And I think in many ways we are writers, at least we are storytellers. And I think it's also because of platforms. I think it's very much like guarded nowadays. There is a gatekeeping role for media to also not only include or exclude writers, but also voices. Yeah. And it's not a criticism. I think a lot of media do very well on this. But it's also lowering the threshold, and I think also the by showing that you have indeed on our platform, you have a midwife contributing, but you also have a professor in physics, but you also have an architect, but then you also have a stay-at-home mom, or young children, students. You have everything, and that's also, I think, then people also discover maybe their hidden talents in many ways. Yeah,
exactly. Or the very banal need for reflecting on it in a different way, maybe.
And I must say, like, I mean, you see some stories written by almost professional writers, and they're beautifully written. But if you talk about stories, the strength of a story is sometimes the ones that are told in the simplest way, and they are extremely powerful. So yeah,
and we actually asked you to at least highlight some of the stories that you've encountered on this kind of journey here. So, and of course, there's a lot to choose from. So I was asking you which one maybe, touched you the most, or was most fun, or what did you come up with? And are you gonna read something from it?
I think Marce's story that she prepared would really fit about what I just said.
Yeah.
I won't read it because this is very precious time, and everyone can just go to the website. But basically, well, in a lot of stories, we have noticed that what people highlight are the ordinary and the everyday lives, which actually remind me a lot of a book that we read in Copenhagen. But just this ordinary that we tend to relegate, but that somehow shapes very like rich and meaningful experience during this quarantine times, especially. So how life started emerging between balconies, which has been great. So the story is about how life between balconies has emerged. But then there's also a really nice story. I actually cried with that one. It's a poem written by a soon-to-be mom from Modena in Italy, and she basically writes a poem for his son and explains how she's waiting for him in a time when the world seems to be restoring its balance. And she describes how the world is at the moment. So I imagine the son or the daughter, whenever he or she reads that, I just cried like a baby, to be honest. And then maybe Job, you would like to talk about the collectivized hope, which is also a great story.
Yeah, exactly. And I think our contributions are so diverse. Let's emphasize that. So it was very hard to pick among all those 150 stories. And I think I picked a story which is actually written by one of our contributors, also a friend of yours, Jacob, someone you know really well, is Alfie.
Yeah.
Alfie Temple Stroud. And he actually wrote a story reflecting on the stories that we have already received. And he noticed kind of this idea of a collectivized hope. And I can read a little bit about what he says about this idea of collectivized hope. And we can maybe have a conversation about that, how we can apply this maybe.
Sure.
So he writes that the compassionate action so many are undertaking separately is to try to enact the hope we all share. We have a collectivized hope. We have socialized the burden of looking ahead, of feeling resilient, of bearing hope, because it may be more than any one of us could do amid all the grief. The rainbows, and he refers to the rainbows you see in many countries. You see rainbows painted on walls or on people's children sketch it, right? The rainbow is like everything is going to be all right. The rainbows are a direction from all to all, without certain destination and with no specified schedule, because each of us alone has to live just where we are, just day to day. And then he continues, it's a collective capacity I didn't know that we had, carrying potential I can now perceive. I suggest this collective hope is itself a source of hope, that we can bear this together, that for all we cannot stop, we can at least do this together. In that sense, everything is going to be all right.
Wow.
And I think that was very nice. And it's also about this idea that we have collectivized this hope. But what does it bring us? What does it mean? And this is a quest. This is actually a search of what it means. Also, as weeks pass by, and in many countries, you see a minor improvement of the situation, but we're still in lockdown. Actually, tonight, just before we had this call, the Dutch Prime Minister announced that we slowly but surely will be on a way back. But it will take months, you know?
Yeah.
And it's maybe this collective hope that indeed might bring some perspective. But the source of this collectivized hope is actually stories by you and me. And by your friends and my friends and their friends and maybe people we have never met. Maybe the fuel that keeps our societies running at the moment.
Exactly. It's a very beautiful kind of written piece that tries to approach this whole project of yours and capture what it does in a very general and broad sense. It's really fucking beautiful. Again, as you said, the stories are so diverse, and you really have to go to the website or the Facebook page. We just put it in the chat again to provide another link to it, but of course you can find it. That is very beautiful.
I was actually thinking about the Danish context as well, right? I think for me and also for the Europeans out there, also the people listening, I think for our generation, it's also the first time that we experience a borderless Europe that suddenly has borders. At least I never experienced those borders too much. Where I'm calling now from is like 10 minutes ride to the German border and 10 minutes ride to the Belgian border. And I find myself in the Netherlands. And I know, Jacob, you also grew up near the German border. Close to
exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's also very interesting. And I'm also very intrigued by how we are going to get out of this.
Yeah. Also because like the national states are taking, at least in Europe, are taking a lot of credit for handling this situation. They are the only one with the response. They are the only one with the right way to solve it. And I think, like, just reading from these stories, I can just hear that this is such a fucking lie. Like, there is no only one solution to it, and nation state aren't necessarily the one, maybe on a political level right now, because we don't have other alternatives. But in the same time, it's just worth remembering that this is both a global crisis, but also a thing that needs to be fixed globally, as you are also talking about, the way to process it. And
it's all together, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We actually have, when we're talking about the beautiful stories, that is one of the stories that actually hit me the most here in Denmark. It's like with the closed borders, there's a story about two pretty old people where one is living in Germany and one is living like in Denmark on the other side of the border. And they're actually meeting because they know that you can't have any cars there. So they're meeting at each side of the border and sitting and having like a little drink and a cup of coffee, and they do that every day to talk about life, with like the space between them sitting in each country and like talking together. So there is some beautiful stories out there, right?
They should write a story for our platform.
No, because they were also saying like we're about to die soon anyway, so we might just fucking enjoy it in the last.
Yeah,
I don't think they have time. I'm sorry, yeah, but it could be a nice end. The last 2 weeks on this show, that is not a very serious show, but when we have guests, it becomes much more stronger. And the last 2 times, we both had a priest and a psychology major talking about loneliness for young people, like first the priest, then the psychology major, because I guess it's something that we like know exists. We feel it a bit in ourselves, stuck in our apartment and stuff like that. But I both wanted to ask you, like, if you're feeling this kind of too. But in the same way, I know that you really believe so much in this project that it like you're the most positive persons that we've had on as guest, and I really no, but I just mean that you seem to draw a lot of energy from it.
Sometimes I think we're not always positive.
No.
I think quarantine especially has been like a roller coaster. Sometimes we have our ups and downs, but the platform has been also a way for us to express that and to know that we're not on our own, even if we're not physically together. There's other ways, virtual ways to be together, and in a way, having this platform has allowed us to not feel as lonely as we probably would. I don't know.
I also think you should, if you compare it, for instance, to other things that started one day, right? And I mean, you have people that gather and they're annoyed with their parents and they're like, okay, let's practice some music in the garage, and they start a band, you know. Or you have people that meet each other in university and have the same idea about innovation, and they gather and they become a startup. But in our case, we already knew each other. For most people we knew in this project, but we haven't met physically ever since we started this all. So it's all moderated and developed through WhatsApp chats that become overcrowded with too many messages, and then Skype calls that are very with lacking connections and stuff like this. So it also has its charm because of that, I would say. It also gets some of its power, I would say, a bit from that, and also the creative spirit, where people are maybe, I mean, in their loneliness, they are still working on something collective, you know? Yeah. I'm a bit coordinating and I have a bit of an overview of what people are doing. And I feel a lot of people are doing a bit like their little own project within the bigger whole. So now we are also discussing, let's interview our grandparents, because...
Fucking good idea.
Yeah, because those are the people that are maybe not capable of writing, at least maybe not in English, but they are people that are very much affected by this crisis. At least in this part of the world, I would say. I mean, I also think it's very important what Marcella already pointed at, is that in this part of the world, it might be a crisis for a lot of older people, and where we have very much compassion with older people that are locked up in their homes. But you have parts of the world where this home concept is already very much under threat or not even there. And I think also because you're exposed to those different things, it might also help indeed to address loneliness in that sense. And how lonely are we after all in this digital age? I mean, I think this is actually quite fun, and I feel very close to you. I think it's also the digital means that already allow us to cover some of its loneliness.
Yeah.
But nothing is as good as a physical hug, right?
Exactly.
Or something like this. I don't think we can replace that.
No.
Yeah.
No, so true. Like we asked both the priest and the psychology major if they had some ideas of what would turn into like a better world because of coronavirus. And you're talking a bit about the space that you get received from almost above to work on your own projects. But it just means also from a view in society, like it must open up some possibility spaces if you want. Like, have you thought about those or things that might change in the big scale or the small scale? We talked a lot about like being aware of just how social a person you actually are. That was one of the good things that came from this time. So I don't know if you had some very specific experiences or just hopes, ideas about a better world.
Well, I think it very much affects dreams, at least in my case. I had a lot of plans for the future and also dreams and hopes, so to say. And those got very much affected. So if you're talking about loneliness, I rather see it very much affects young people's ambitions and dreams and also perspectives on the world. I think if we already talk about the climate crisis and the climate change in that aspect, I think it has already been bugging quite some of us already for a while, and something that we feel very concerned by. And this crisis coming on top of that is also adding to maybe a kind of existential crisis for a lot of quarter life time crises, and I think it is very important to address those. And I'm not sure that this crisis is very beneficial for people in that sense, for our generation.
No, but I was also also talking about like not traveling, being forced not to travel, and the effects that might have on climate change. Like that, everybody is becoming much more aware on a more physical way. For example, that we can actually do, as you have done, a beautiful project from a crisis, that we can turn these crisis experience into something like good, positive on a very big scale. Do you see that happening as well, or?
I think so, but I'm very wary of saying how it will imply in the real life world. I think we are a bit in a in-between zone now, and how they will crystallize, so to say. I'm very curious. What do you think, Marcella? You're usually the hopeful one.
I'm usually sometimes not during quarantine. No, but I think in a way it might sound like a cliche, but I think it's actually like an opportunity to just put the spotlight on places that we normally don't look at, because we're just so in our bubble. We just think of our individual problems, and we don't see beyond that. So in a way, I think that this global suffering, even though it's not the same for everyone, it just makes visible more realities, and just acknowledging these different realities might actually help to do something against those global challenges that we have, such as climate change, like Job was mentioning. So I think in a way it's an opportunity. Of course, it's terrible what is happening, but there's also a bit of an opportunity there. So I'm the hopeful one. Yeah.
First of all, we're so happy that you have joined us tonight. And Marcella, you promised to kind of drop some news here towards the end. Do we need to make drum roll?
Yes, please, some drum roll. So we are very, very, very happy to share with you some very exciting news. And the news is that we will launch our platform in Spanish this week, probably. So stay posted and spread the word with your Spanish speaker friends. Yeah.
Wow.
Do you know how many Spanish people are in this world? It's a huge fucking thing. It's Like, did you translate all of that, or how did that come about?
No, we're actually receiving a lot of stories in Spanish. And with the crisis just hitting in Latin America, we hope to also keep receiving more stories. So yeah, we're very excited about that. Should I say the name in Spanish or?
Yeah, do it.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, it's Transmite Historias No El Virus.com.
.com.
But also for the people in Copenhagen or in Denmark, you don't have to write it in Spanish. You could. I mean, let's face the challenge. No, but also in English or even in Danish. Then I'll send it to Jacob and to Daniel to translate for us.
We will.
That's a basic shout out. Yeah.
We just got hired.
Yes.
Exactly. Welcome to the team. No, but that would be really fun. And so also for your listeners, friends, family, grandparents, whatever. Just feel free to contribute. It's easy.
Sounds like an amazing project to
and spread stories, not the virus.
No, thank you so much, guys, for hosting us.
And thank you for coming here. That was amazing to hear that you can actually find some positive things in this time we have right now.
Thank you very much. It was really fun.
Yeah, it was. And see you soon again.
Yes, hopefully.
Ja, goodbye, guys. Daniel, vi er lige ved at være færdige for i dag efter en lang sending. Ciao. Hvad hedder det? Er du helt bumpet?
Jeg føler mig en smule bumpet, men jeg er sindssygt stolt af det her, der er kommet ud af det. Hvor er det fedt at have så mange fede mennesker med indover. Ikke desto mindre er det ikke slut, fordi på fredag, der sender vi igen. Eller vi gør ikke. Men
nej, præcis. Vi har 2 programmer. Og hiphop radio kommer tilbage. Der var engang hiphop. Så der er 2 norske værter, eller 3 norske værter, som kommer til at sende hele fredagsfladen, og det bliver rigtig spændende. Hvad tid er det, der går i gang? Er det klokken 18?
Det er klokken 18, det starter, og så kører det ellers bare derudad.
Ja. Men tak for i dag, og ja, pas godt på jer selv derude.
Ja.
Hej hej, tak.
Hej hej. Ciao, ciao.
Tak for i aften.